What happens when the most powerful man in a courtroom is the one breaking the law? In Part 2, the silence is broken. A single voice recording, cold, calculated, and unmistakable, threatens to shatter everything built on secrecy and fear. This is no longer just a courtroom drama. This is a reckoning, and what happens next will shake the very meaning of justice. If you think the battle is over, think again. The most dangerous truth is the one they tried to erase. Part 2 begins. Jasmine didn't speak as she walked back to the presentation table. Her movements were quiet, almost understated, as if she were simply retrieving another piece of paperwork. But her silence wasn't passive, it was intentional. A kind of silence that said, "What's about to happen doesn't need an introduction." She placed the small silver recorder down on the wood with the same reverence someone might place a folded flag. Then, without fanfare, she pressed play. Her voice, calm but resolute, cut through the courtroom like a sharpened blade. Let's hear it in his own words. A brief crackle, then a voice emerged, gravelly, composed, cold. Make sure she never sees those ledgers. The impact was instantaneous. The courtroom, which had teetered on the edge of disbelief for hours, suddenly collapsed into a stunned hush. There was no mistaking the voice. Judge Horace Whitmore, clear as daylight, recorded, preserved, now playing in front of a full jury, courtroom staff, defense attorneys, and a national livestream audience. One juror gasped audibly and dropped his pen. It clattered onto the floor, louder than it had any right to be. At the defense table, Preston Kincaid's jaw clenched so tight the veins on his neck pulsed. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief and turned toward his attorney, his eyes pleading for reassurance that didn't come. Whitmore sat frozen, his eyes fluttered closed, not in composure, but collapse. The high bench, the robe, the gavel, they all meant nothing now. In that moment, he wasn't a judge. He was a man stripped bare by his own voice. Jasmine stepped back from the table and faced the room. Her expression didn't gloat. It didn't smile. It was calm. An eerie, quiet calm that made her next words feel volcanic. "Justice doesn't kneel to power," she said, her tone barely above conversational. "It exposes it." No one moved. No one dared. The gravity of those 10 words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. No one could unhear the tape, and no one could pretend anymore. Whitmore broke first. His voice exploded in a panicked shriek. "That recording is illegal." His voice cracked mid-sentence, and for the first time all day it wasn't laced with condescension or authority. It was fear. Fear and fury and something deeper. A man who had been unmasked, with the entire world watching. Jasmine didn't flinch. She calmly retrieved a thin folder from her bag. A red federal seal burned against the cover. She opened it, pulled out a document, and walked it slowly, deliberately across the courtroom floor to the judge's bench. She laid it flat. "Certified, time-stamped, admissible," she said, each word a hammer strike. "Issued by the Office of the Inspector General. 3 weeks ago." The courtroom didn't erupt, it froze. Even Whitmore didn't reach for the paper. He only stared at it, like it was his own death certificate. Around the room, chairs creaked as people shifted in disbelief. A bailiff blinked repeatedly. A clerk clutched the side of his desk. In the gallery, Serena Delgado leaned forward, pressing her phone toward her mouth as she whispered into her live feed. "History is being made at the Southern District Court." On screen, her viewers multiplied by the second. Across social media, hashtags surged. WhitmoreGate, Justice Exposed, Voice of Truth. Someone near the back whispered, "He just lit the match and burned himself alive." Jasmine didn't look away from Whitmore. She didn't need to. The evidence was doing the speaking now. For all his years on the bench, all the judgments he'd passed, Whitmore had forgotten the one truth that made the law work. The courtroom is never yours. It belongs to the truth. And the truth, at last, had a voice. The recorder kept playing. Another faint whisper of static. The tension didn't dissipate. It calcified, like breath frozen in a snowstorm. No one reached for the pause button. No one dared to interrupt the voice of consequence. Jasmine stood at the center of the courtroom, shoulders squared, chin high. Around her, power reeled. She didn't have to say another word. The tape had already done it for her. The silence after the tape ended wasn't just seismic, it was seismic. It rang louder than shouting, heavier than any verdict ever passed in that courtroom. No one dared move. No one breathed too deeply. At the center of it all sat Judge Horace Whitmore, still upright in his chair, but with both hands clenched into trembling fists on the bench. His authority, once untouchable, now felt like a costume he couldn't take off fast enough. And then, it happened. The rear doors of the courtroom creaked open with a groan that sliced through the tension like a blade. Heads turned. Everyone held their breath. U.S. Marshal Eric Langley entered first, towering and composed, his badge gleaming under the fluorescence. 2 federal officers followed behind, dark, tactical vests over crisp shirts. Langley held up a folder in one hand, voice firm and resolute. "Judge Horace Whitmore," he began, and the entire courtroom leaned forward, as if summoned by fate. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to destroy evidence, and abuse of judicial power." The words hung in the air for a second too long. Then chaos began, not in sound but in disbelief. Serena Delgado's hands flew to her mic, her voice barely steady as she broadcast live across the nation. "We are witnessing history," she whispered. "A sitting federal judge is being arrested, on the bench." Whitmore didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly as if searching for some last fragment of control, but the words never came. His eyes darted toward the ceiling, then the exit, then finally back down at his own hands. As Langley stepped forward, time seemed to slow. The metal cuffs clicked into place with a sound that was almost sacred. Not violent, not dramatic, just final. The courtroom gasped. One juror clutched their armrest, eyes wide. Across the room, the same clerk who once smirked at Jasmine now watched in stunned silence. The smirks had vanished. The snickering was gone. No one came to his defense. Not a lawyer, not a staff member, not a soul. Whitmore didn't look up. He couldn't. He bowed his head, not from shame, but because the weight of the truth had finally proven heavier than the robe he wore. And that was when it began. The domino effect. Quiet, powerful, irreversible. Riley Quinn rose from her seat, arms folded, her jaw tight with frustration that had long been buried under caution. "About damn time," she muttered. Not to anyone in particular, but loud enough for every camera to catch. Across the courtroom, Preston Kincaid's face broke. Sweat beaded down his temple. He twisted in his chair, stammering as his composure unraveled. "We can work this out. This doesn't have to go public. We can fix this. There's still time." His voice cracked like dry timber. Jasmine turned her head slowly, her expression unmoved. The courtroom spotlight may have shifted, but she hadn't. Her stare pinned him in place like a sword. "If you're nervous, Mr. Kincaid," she said coolly, "perhaps you have more to hide." He stopped talking. It wasn't just her words. It was the tone, the certainty, the quiet implication that his turn was coming, and it would be worse than Whitmore's because now the nation was watching. Whitmore, now cuffed, was escorted down the steps of his bench. The same steps he once looked down from with icy detachment. The same room where he'd silenced voices with a glance, crushed testimonies with a smirk. Now he was nothing more than a man in shackles. The courtroom door slammed behind him with a deep, echoing finality. There was no applause, no jeering, just silence, thick and full and holy. But for those who had witnessed injustice, for those who had been mocked, dismissed, or silenced, this was the moment the tide turned. A judge had fallen, a system had been shaken, and justice had taken its first breath. Preston Kincaid sat frozen, as if the very bones inside him had turned to concrete. His lips had gone pale, and the edges of his perfectly tailored suit no longer gave him stature, only the illusion of control, rapidly slipping. His hands clutched the edge of the defense table, fingertips digging into the wood as if it could anchor him. The stack of legal documents before him might as well have been blank pages. Nothing on that table could save him now. The room wasn't loud. It was quiet in the way a storm pauses, eerily still just before everything changes. The jurors no longer looked uncertain or passive. They looked like a wall of judgment, and their eyes, all of them, were on him. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward slowly. Her heels struck the courtroom floor in a rhythm that echoed something ancient and deliberate. She didn't wear fury on her face anymore, not even triumph, only resolve. She stopped just feet from Kincaid, her presence radiating the weight of every voice silenced by men like him. "Would you like to continue this trial?" she asked, her voice even, sharp, "or discuss a plea?" It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like mercy being offered once. Kincaid swallowed hard. The man who had built skyscrapers, who had smiled beside governors and hidden behind headlines like "Visionary of the Decade," now trembled like a man who saw his own empire rotting from the inside out. "I want protection," he said, almost whispering. His voice cracked on the last word. No more arrogance, no more strategy, just fear, and the beginning of a reckoning. Jasmine gave the faintest nod, no satisfaction in her eyes, no smugness, only focus. She knew this wasn't the end, it was the doorway. The real battle was in what came after the confession, what his plea could unlock, what systems it might finally collapse. And beyond those courtroom walls, the country was listening. Veritas News aired its breaking broadcast within the hour. Serena Delgado, voice crisp, face lit by both the glow of studio lights and something deeper, conviction, opened the segment with one clear headline: "SystemShook, Justice Spoke." The footage rolled. The arrest, the tape. Jasmine's gaze as Whitmore was led away. Then came the ripple. Assistant U.S. Attorney Riley Quinn stepped up to the podium in front of a line of flags and reporters. "Today we open a federal inquiry into inter-court collusion and systemic abuse across state jurisdictions," she declared. For the first time, her voice didn't carry caution. It carried purpose. Online, Nina Park, an engineer from Queens and the daughter of immigrants, posted a video that went viral within hours. "Title 42 was never written for people like us," she said, standing in front of City Hall. "It's time we rewrite the laws to reflect the people they're supposed to protect." Millions shared it. Dozens of local officials reached out. Across the country, in a law classroom at UCLA, a young student stood at the whiteboard, black marker in hand. With steady strokes, he wrote the words, "Accountability isn't revenge, it's democracy." And still, the cameras followed Jasmine. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't wave to the crowd. She simply walked down the long courthouse hallway, her steps slow, measured. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the silence was no longer heavy with disdain. Now, it was filled with something sacred. Respect. Every eye turned to her, not as a spectacle, but as something rare in American justice, a woman who had forced the system to see itself and act. As Jasmine reached the doors and stepped outside, the light cut across her face, catching in her eyes like steel. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her voice came not from her lips but from the closing narration, strong, steady, unforgettable. "This isn't revenge, this is justice." The screen faded to black. A swell of music rose, not dramatic, but grounded and unshakable. And one by one, names appeared across the screen. A judge fallen, a tycoon exposed, a system trembling, a voice that refused to break, and a nation beginning, finally, to listen. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with fanfare or applause. It comes in silence, in truth laid bare, in the quiet fall of a lie too long believed. What we've witnessed is more than a legal battle. It's a reminder that systems, no matter how powerful, are only as just as the people who dare to challenge them. When truth speaks loud enough, even the highest walls begin to crack. So here we are, not at the end, but at a turning point. Because justice isn't a moment, it's a movement. If this story stirred something in you, share your thoughts below. We want to hear how it made you feel, what it made you question. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This is just the beginning. The next chapter is already taking shape, and you won't want to miss it.